assume that Democrats really do put the needs of illegals ahead of American citizens?
That's just not true. Of course, the first principle of the American government is to protect and look after the American people, American citizens. The problem is you can't have Democrats stand while Donald Trump's talking about those who are undocumented when he's got an ICE agency that is killing American citizens.
Well, look, this requires context, and I think we both know that. I mean, look, you can't tell citizens to get in the faces of law enforcement and ICE agents and think that ICE agents are not going to respond.
You can't have people just go try to interrupt law enforcement, including ICE. But the answer to that is not to shoot them dead. I guess I just have such a strong belief in civil liberties and constitutional rights. He's an American citizen. You don't kill him.
Okay, deep breath, because today is one of those you can't make this up days where sports, politics, and ego all collide at full speed. We're diving into a stack of clips that hit the same nerve. Trump still trying to force himself into American life like he's the main character and the country reacting in real time. And with his second term already pushing aggressive ICE actions and power grab vibes, this stuff isn't just funny, it's a warning light. Let's watch it together. If you love explosive content like this and want to see more, click that subscribe button.
If you agree with this statement, then stand up and show your support. The first duty of the American government is to protect American citizens, not illegal aliens. Isn't that a shame? You should be ashamed of yourself not standing up. You should be ashamed of yourself. Look, nobody stands up. These people are crazy, I'm telling you. They're crazy. Mrs. Zaretsky, tonight I promise you we will ensure justice for your magnificent daughter, Irina. How do you not stand? How do you not stand?
Well, there's the State of the Union Tuesday night. Democrats who attended the State of the Union received a dressing down from President Trump after they refused to stand for Americans over illegals. At least 71 Democrats and one independent from both the House and Senate entirely skipped the speech, holding their own, quote, State of the Swamp event instead. Joining me now is California Congressman Ro Khanna, who was at the State of the Union but did not stand. Congressman, thank you so much for being here this morning. It's good to see you. Are we to assume that Democrats
Always
really
good to
do?
see you.
Thank you, sir. Are we to assume that Democrats really do put the needs of illegals ahead of American citizens?
That's just not true. Of course, the first principle of the American government is to protect and look after the American people, American citizens. The problem is you can't have Democrats stand while Donald Trump's talking about those who are undocumented when he's got an ICE agency that is killing American citizens, when he's got an ICE agency that is raiding American citizens and treating the undocumented as violation of human rights. So you're never going to get Democrats to stand for that and say that we agree with Trump's ICE agency.
Well, look, this requires context, and I think we both know that. I mean, look, you can't tell citizens to get in the faces of law enforcement and ICE agents and think that ICE agents are not going to respond. You can't tell citizens that it's okay to interrupt an operation that is underway where you're expecting the ICE agents to take down criminals who are here illegally and not expect them to respond. You can't have a person who's armed with a gun showing in his belt interrupting ICE operations and not expect an ICE agent to react. Do we agree on that?
Maria, you're trying to have a reasonable conversation. Let me say what I agree with. You can't have people just go try to interrupt law enforcement, including ICE. But the answer to that is not to shoot them dead. There is a proportional use of force. There is training. And would you agree that in a number of these cases, ICE agents have exceeded what a proportional response is?
I think if an ICE agent feels a threat and feels that he or she and his team is under threat by having someone who's armed, clearly armed with a gun on his belt, interrupt him, then he's going to shoot. And they're trained to kill.
But Maria, I mean, even in this country where we have a Second Amendment, you can't say that any person who shows up with a gun simply by doing that at an event could be shot to death. I mean, in Alex Pretty's case.
Yes, the person that we're talking about, Alex Pretty, we've got video of him, the day before or whatever earlier, knocking out the car light on the back of the agent's car, throwing things at the car, so he was actually antagonizing them.
Yeah, but that's not capital punishment. You don't give someone the capital punishment. Yes, he did harass them a few days before. Yes, he had a gun on them. I guess I just have such a strong belief in civil liberties and constitutional rights. He's an American citizen. You don't kill him. And I think most Americans look at this and they wanted the border to be secure. Some of them actually think that the border is more secure now, but they don't want ICE agents in their libraries, in their schools, on their streets, harassing not just the undocumented, but harassing American citizens. And I wish we could get to a common sense on this.
Yeah, and I think people are still raw over the murders of certain Americans at the hands of illegals, right? Laken Riley. I mean, the list is long, and I think that's what is having some people take a step back and say, how are the Democrats not standing for that?
Oh, we're doing the stand up or you hate America routine again. Classic. This is the oldest MAGA stage trick in the book. Manufacture a loyalty test on live TV, then smear anyone who doesn't clap on command as pro-crime. That host wasn't asking a question, she was writing a guilty verdict and hoping Ro Khanna would sign it. And Khanna's point hits harder than people want to admit. You can want a secure border and still refuse to normalize a federal agency acting like it's above accountability. That's not anti-law enforcement, that's pro-constitution. Because once you start rationalizing lethal force as well, they felt threatened, you've basically written a blank check for abuse, and historically, guess who gets that check cashed on them first? Regular citizens. Also, notice how Trump turns personal tragedy into a prop, then demands applause for it. That's not leadership. That's a hostage video with flags.
This beautiful nurse in Georgia was murdered by an illegal when she went for a jog. So it's things like that. I mean, look, you saw your colleague, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania standing for certain things. Do you feel in retrospect maybe you should have stood up for certain things at that State of the Union?
I stood up for a lot. Obviously, the whole country stood up for our amazing hockey team and our goalie. I stood up for the extraordinary courage of the helicopter pilot who was shot in the leg and got the Congressional Medal of Honor. I stood up for the pilot over Korea who took on the Soviets and got the Medal of Honor. And there were many other people that were recognized. I stood up for a young girl who was recovering. So we stood up for many heroes in the gallery. What we didn't stand up for is a lot of Donald Trump's policies, but that's democracy, Maria. I mean that happens in every state of the union. I was respectful. We didn't make a scene. There was, I stood up when the president entered the chamber, and that's what State of the Unions are.
And I want to get your take on policy, sir, because Vice President J.D. Vance is quieting concerns of potential war in the Middle East, saying that there's no chance a military strike would result in a years-long war. The U.S. and Iran are set to resume those nuclear talks next week in Vienna. After wrapping up a third round in Geneva yesterday, Democrats now are planning to force a House vote next week on a war powers resolution related to Iran. This bipartisan measure would require congressional approval before further U.S. military action in Iran. Congressman, I know you're the co-sponsor of this measure. What do you want to see here? Do you worry that publicly clipping the wings of a sitting president is giving information and an edge to our adversaries while doing so?
I appreciate actually what Vice President Vance said. I didn't realize he had said that. I had a good relationship with him before he became vice president. I always thought of him as someone who was against intervening and getting in another Middle East war. I hope maybe he'll endorse Thomas Massie and my war powers resolution, because all Thomas Massie and my war powers resolution says is before you put troops on the ground in Iran, before you spend billions of our dollars in another war in the Middle East, how about you come to Congress and ask Congress first? And you know what America first means to me? It means spending money on manufacturing jobs here, on child care here, on health care here, not getting into another war with our troops thousands of miles away in the Middle East.
Now, I wonder, it's hard to know exactly the strategy of a sitting commander-in-chief. I mean, I wonder if the armada in Iran is more about China than it is about Iran. And I know you've thought about this a lot as well, sir, in terms of China and our adversaries. One of the biggest leverage points that this president has, that our wonderful government has, is the flow of oil to China, our number one adversary. Could it be that this armada, and as it is growing, and the closeness and striking distance of Iran, is more about increasing the leverage against China than it is even about Iran? And what do you have to say about that? Because you don't necessarily know the strategy that the president is thinking about all the time when talking just about Iran.
Well, it's true that if you close the Strait of Hormuz, the biggest the loser in that would be China. And it's our fleet that protects that strait and ensures that you have the free flow of oil, not just to the United States, but to China and around the world. But I don't believe that that's why you have our second aircraft carrier there. And there are a lot of people in the administration and close to the administration talking about regime change. If the president really was doing this to make sure oil and trade was free flowing along the seas, I'd have a very different view of it. There's been no indication to me that that's the reason.
Well, he can't give you an indication, because as soon as he gives you an indication, he gives our adversaries an indication, right?
Well, look, but why would the United States also be shouldering that? I mean, what about China stepping up to keep the Strait of Hormuz open and making sure that they have some role? Right now, America is basically the policeman of the world. I appreciate that, but I don't think we need to put even more of our troops, more of our money there. When so many people in this country are struggling, there are not enough jobs for young college graduates and high school graduates. Cost of health care is too high, as the president said. We don't have enough money for retirement, as the president said. Housing is too much.
Wait, did you catch how fast that conversation tried to sprint from immigration fear-mongering into another Middle East escalation? That's the playbook. Whip people up about illegals, then slide in a blank check foreign policy like it's dessert. And Khanna, this is why he's effective. He's not doing the performative cable news chest thumping. He's anchoring it in the Constitution, war powers, congressional authorization, accountability. That's not some niche procedural nerd fight. After Iraq, after Afghanistan, after the forever war hangover. The idea that one person just drifts into conflict because vibes. No. Also, notice the branding hijack. America first gets used to justify cruelty at home and chaos abroad. But Khanna flips it back to material reality. Jobs, healthcare, childcare. That's the contrast. Rights and priorities versus spectacle and force. And J.D. Vance, quieting concerns? Yeah, I've heard that movie before.
I'd rather the president focus on that. I'd rather he give the $21 billion to Mir Mamdani to build the housing that they met about. I mean, that would be great. Let's try to build things here.
Let me ask you, do you think China is supporting Iran by sending military equipment and components to Iran?
I don't know. I'm the top Democrat on the China committee. We've been investigating that. We don't have a definitive we don't have a definitive answer, but if they do, it's totally unacceptable, and it is totally self-defeating because if there is a action by a Iranian regime that's destabilized, they're the ones who are going to lose oil. So the president should make that very clear, that there's zero tolerance for any military transfer to Iran's regime from China.
Now, I got to get your take on this situation around AI, Congressman, because AI defense technology company Anthropic, as you know, is rejecting further work with the Pentagon. The CEO, Dario Amodei, says he cannot agree to have his company's systems used for mass domestic surveillance, nor to power fully autonomous war weapons. It comes as the China Select Committee is warning Beijing is expanding its space footprint across Latin America with at least 11 new facilities. It also comes on the day that Block, the Jack Dorsey fintech, is announcing it's cutting 40% of its workforce, 40% of employees. That's 4,000 people, because it says that its AI tools are going to replace that human work. Now, let's talk first about this mass domestic surveillance. Is there mass domestic surveillance underway right now for American citizens? I don't know who to be more worried about, China surveilling America or American government surveilling. What is your take on the Anthropic response to the Pentagon?
Good for Anthropic. I don't want technology used by a federal government to have mass surveillance on American citizens. That's common sense. I mean, think about if you had a Democratic president. Would you want them to have tools of AI to figure out whether you have a gun, to figure out what your church you're going to? It is scary. And I hope we can come together and say, no, we don't want mass surveillance. And the other thing is,
because you're an elected official, what is the plan to push back on these AI tools that are becoming increasingly powerful, so powerful that the head of Anthropic is talking about mass domestic surveillance? What are you going to do about it?
Well, I laid out 7 AI principles at a recent speech at Stanford. Let me give you 3 of them. One is we need an AI Bill of Rights. That means you own your data, and companies and the federal government shouldn't be able to take your data for surveillance. 2 is that we need human beings in the loop. You can't just have AI doing jobs. And 3 is that we need a jobs program in this country for young people and people who may have a hard time getting an entry-level job. We need to take this very, very seriously and put the American people and human beings over agentic AI and robots.
Yeah, this is really important. And Congressman, as we wrap up here, I want to get your take on the macroeconomic story, because you just listed all these things that you have problems with, and I assume that's because you are talking about policy. But look, when you look at the macro story, economic growth last month was close to last quarter was close to 5%. Inflation has been coming down pretty significantly. I mean, you talked about some of the things that are still an issue, like housing prices and mortgages and certain groceries. But I mean, when you look at your oversight of spending during the Biden years, I'm questioning, why you didn't say all of this when inflation was at 40-year highs under Joe Biden.
Well, look, if you're looking at the economy for my district in Silicon Valley and the tech leaders, where we have 1/3 of the nation's stock market, it's done very well for these many of these tech billionaires. But if you're looking at the economy for someone who is struggling to pay health care, struggling to pay their grocery bills, struggling to pay housing bills, wondering if their kids are actually going to get a good paying job, then the economy isn't doing well. And we need to focus on the working class. Now, the spending that took place was both Donald Trump with the CARES Act and Joe Biden to get out of COVID. The problem, though, is that we have not had a higher living wage. We've not had real policies to reduce health care costs. We've not built more housing. And we've not had a Marshall Plan to create good jobs in the United States.
So what about the fact that President Trump has done deals with all these pharmaceutical companies to get drug prices down? And what about the fact that you're looking at inflation lower, and it was up in the prior administration? And when you look at wages are actually up, and they were down under Joe Biden's leadership. Can you assess the...
Oh, wow. You see what just happened there? The moment Khanna starts talking about mass domestic surveillance, the host immediately tries to drag it back into, but the macro numbers, though, like we're discussing a quarterly earnings call. That's the whole sickness of this era. Freedom gets treated like a side issue. And Khanna's point is bigger than Anthropic. Because under Trump 2.0, you've got this loud free speech branding while the machinery of the state is getting more aggressive. More raids, more databases, more pressure on agencies to get results. AI makes that impulse scalable. It's not just one overzealous official, it's automated suspicion. Also, notice the right-wing investor class vibe. Billionaires funding platforms, buying influence, then screaming censorship when the public pushes back. That's not open debate. That's pay-to-win reality. So yeah, AI, Bill of Rights, human in the loop, that's democracy defense, not tech whining.
Macro, you're saying it's good for one portion of the economy, but the numbers don't say that. The numbers actually say things are going well.
Maria, most people don't feel that. Look, manufacturing jobs are down from when President Biden was there. Wages haven't gone up at the level where people feel their wages are going up higher than their costs. Wages actually were going up through part of President Biden. But I don't think we have to debate Biden versus Trump. I think this economy has been broken for working and middle-class Americans. We need more manufacturing jobs in this country. We need good care jobs in this country. We need good technology jobs across America. We need a Marshall Plan for America. I call it New economic patriotism, and we should tax the billionaires so that we could get health care, child care, education for people. I think it's a simple new social contract.
With all due respect, the Democrats are talking about affordability while at the same time raising taxes on everybody. I mean, you've got a wealth tax in California. You've got Mamdani talking in New York about a 9.5% property tax increase. So, I mean, and you're talking about manufacturing jobs. That's the whole reason the president has moved supply chains to America and is trying to get companies to come to America to build their products. Final word here, sir.
I agree with the president's goals of making manufacturing possible in the United States.
Right.
I disagree with how he's gone about doing it. Manufacturing jobs are down. And I am for raising taxes on billionaires. If you're a billionaire and you're hearing me, I believe you should pay higher taxes. If you're not a billionaire, you should. Then this doesn't apply to you. And we could raise trillions.
That's a very
we could raise trillions to invest in manufacturing here and jobs here.
That's a very small part of our population, billionaires. I mean, you're not going to raise the revenue.
But they have a lot of the money.
Yeah. But you're not going to raise the revenue.
$4 trillion. You could raise $4 trillion.
It's going to trickle down to people who are not billionaires. Come on. We can't count on just billionaires to pay the bills. But, Congressman, I think this was a really fruitful discussion, and I so appreciate your time this morning, sir.
Man, that whole sequence is the same story in different costumes. The arena booze, the studio spin, the numbers are great lecture, the endless urge to turn government into a compliance machine. People are telling you in real time they're not buying it. And here's what jumps out. Trump world cannot process legitimacy unless it's forced. If the crowd doesn't clap, it's rigged. If wages don't stretch, it's fake news. If people demand limits on raids, databases, and surveillance, suddenly they're the extremists. It's always the same move. Redefine freedom as obedience, then call it patriotism. Khanna stepping in with tax the billionaires, fund the basics, rebuild the country isn't radical. It's what a functioning society sounds like. The other side's answer is vibes, punishment, and control, with a merch link. So tell me, what part scared you more? The cheering for crackdowns or the casual shrug at rights? And yeah, stay loud, stay engaged, and vote like your future isn't a branding opportunity.